We're here in the theatre in Connolly Books in Dublin to interview Seán Edwards today. Seán, could you tell me a bit about your family background, briefly about your family background, your mother and father?
My parents were from Waterford City, and my father, though, he'd been born in Belfast, and his father was a prison officer, but he went off to the war in 1914 and got killed. I don't know much about him at all, except that he was a kind of missing in the history that I'm aware of, as his personality or anything. Frank didn't like reminiscing very much, because he lived very much in the present, and he was so. But why somebody who for 46 years old with a secure job and a young family would go off to the war when he didn't really have to, I don't understand. And even if he'd been in the reserve, I don't think they'd have made him go. If he really objected, but I just don't know. Anyway, but my grandmother then went back to, she was from South Kilkenny, and so she went back and settled into the city, settled in the city of Waterford in Barrack Street, and where she was a district nurse, very popular, very well known as a district nurse. And my father's elder brother, Jack, he was in the IRA, and he was murdered in Kilkenny jail during the Civil War by the state, an unofficial extrajudicial execution. Frank was only 14 at the time, but he followed in the kind of Republican ideology that he picked up from his brother and his grandmother, and he found his way in also into IRA, and he was also very active. He was a teacher, and he was active in the union, and he was secretary of the Waterford Trades Council at one stage, and there's a big agitation over landlordism. But one of the landlords they picked on us deliberately was, as it happened, was parish priest. And anyway, it didn't do his relationship with his employer. Of course, the church has a primary school teacher. It didn't do his relationship with them any good. But then, and my mother was in Communist, and that's how they met together on Stephen Lawn. And they were both joined the Republican Congress following Padre O'Donnell. And around this time, 1934, I think, Frank was dismissed from his job, and he'd been told that he'd be allowed to resign, that if he didn't go to the Republican Congress, he'd be allowed to resign. Well, he went, and he wasn't allowed to resign. He was fired. Waterford was unusual in that it was evenly divided about so many issues in its history. It was half Redmondite and half Sinn Féin at one stage, and half the city was pro-Frank and half of the city was against him. So it was, and that's Waterford now. Another city, either there would have been no resistance in other places, or
And how did he live? He'd no work then.
Oh, well, he moved up to Dublin. He was working with Frank Ryan on products, and he got and he did various other jobs, manual jobs. He used to brag about having built the Pullafuca Dam, and been responsible for Blessington Reservoir there. So that was as a pick and shovel job. Anyway, with that, and then with the Spanish War, Frank went to join the International Brigade, and my mother ran the Spanish Aid Committee, along with Nora Harkin, and the chairman of the Spanish Aid Committee was John Swift. The two young women did a lot of the legwork and
And was Father O'Flanagan the rabbi?
Father O'Flanagan was
he
very
part of
much
that?
involved, and my mother knew him very well indeed. The Spanish Aid Committee brought over a priest from the Basque Country, Ramon de Borda, and they had quite a big meeting, I believe, but it was very difficult because the whole church and the whole of the political establishment was either pro-Franco or afraid to speak up. And but that's my family background. I had two parents at the Republican Congress in 1994.
Was there cousins of your father or anything?
My cousins? Neither.
Yeah. That were in the Republican Congress?
No, neither of my parents had any first cousins. Peculiar that, and their brothers and sisters. Well, my father's two sisters and my mother's, they weren't kind of politically active. You know.
And moving on, how did you get involved in politics? And were you involved in the comedy youth and things like that?
Well, I grew up in a fairly political household, and I was always aware, even as young, of the struggles going on. I remember we would have been pro-Mau Mau and pro-Malaysian resistance in terms of kind of international things, and pro-Soviet. So that's the atmosphere of the house, you know. And, so outside the house, as a child, a few things I went to when I was quite young, which I don't remember that well, but I can remember two South African students that came to the house, and they talked a lot about apartheid and about that. And so I was kind of interested in South Africa from a very early age. And so I joined the Communist Party when I was 19. And that would have been 1961. So quite a while ago now.
Yeah.
And it just seemed a natural progression for me to join the party.
And had you been involved with the comedy youth movement or anything like that? Or
Well,
did
the comedy youth was later. I mean,
Oh.
I was the founder of the comedy youth.
Oh. And when did the comedy youth movement, was it 1966 or something, was it?
And I was in at the beginning of the organisation, and when we had, 7 or 8, and when I got married in '69, after that, and I was working in County Meath and County Wexford, so obviously wasn't involved that very much. At that time, Eddie Lacken had come in to the comedy youth movement, and he gave very good leadership indeed.
were talking there about South Africa and the Anti Apartheid Movement. Were you involved in that?
Founder of the Anti Apartheid Movement.
With people like Catarass?
No, as a student, I wrote a paper in Philosophical Society in Trinity, and I invited a man who had been the last white member of Parliament in South Africa representing black people. This seat was abolished with the establishment of the nationalists as in government and the development of the apartheid system. Not that what went before was that much was anything wonderful about it, but I remember that talk. Sam Khan was his name, and I'd been in London sometime after that, and I called in at the anti-apartheid office in London, which was relatively new at the time, and this woman I was talking to there, Phyllis Altman, I think her name was, she was under this very energetic young lawyer who was going to get a job, was going to Dublin Trinity. And sure enough I met him, and I was, in fact, she must have said something about me as well, because he approached me. I was just crossing Front Square and being kind of in a very excited manner said, did I know how to get a room, book a room for a meeting, which would, and I did, and I just went and did it on behalf of the Socialist Society without telling.
This is in Trinity College.
In Trinity College, yes, in Trinity College, of course. And that was the first meeting, and it was addressed by Arthur Goldrack, who had escaped from South Africa after the Rivonia arrests. And Rivonia was his house, that where they were arrested. And he and another man had got out of South Africa dressed as priests, which they found quite amusing because they were both Jewish. And but a very strong speech, and that was the meeting. And few people got together after that meeting and actually started the anti-apartheid movement. I remember Calvin made a collection speech, and he said, "Has anybody got a £20 note?" It was significant enough, 1962. And of course somebody had a £20 note, because he'd handed me one before the meeting. So that was the...
A week's wages.
So we quite a good collection, because of course it attracted another £20 note. So that was, and I was on that committee for 30 years, and which I think it was an example of a solidarity organisation. We managed, I mean, you have to give Caddy huge credit for, they managed to have a full, practically a spectrum of all the kind of more or less decent people, from members of Fine Gael, Communist Party, Provisional Sinn Féin, Labour, and were actually on the committee of the anti-apartheid movement at one time. So but it took quite a lot of people underrate how long it took. I mean, the time of the Dunn Stores strike, which was, I suppose, that and the Springbok store, the two high points of the movement, must have been 20 years going at the time of the Dunn Store strike, and we'd had, the unions had already agreed, unions often agree things on paper, and if it hadn't been for the courage and initiative of the women on the shop floor at the till, the strike, I mean, people get the most credit for that are the workers there in Dunnes Stores, because we had been going for quite a long time. And we were going a good while. I mean, there was a previous tour of the Springboks, not the one we had the big demonstration, but the previous one.
There was one 1970, wasn't it?
No, I'm not, I don't. You might be better on the dates.
And was the one earlier than that?
No, the big one, 1970 I think was the one which
the big demo.
we had the big demonstration, but the previous one was 4 or 5 years earlier, and there were 7 of us hitched down to Limerick, to Dublin Park, to pick us the Springboks there, and there was 7 students hitched back, and I suppose that those 7 were precursors of the 40,000 we got in Dublin. That's a big one. And Anti Apartheid Movement did make a big contribution, and the Irish one, I don't think anyone else managed to get such a widely representative following. And now I see the Palestinian support group, Palestinian Solidarity, is beginning to get that kind of support. Not quite as spectacular yet, but it's getting there, and we didn't have a real pro-South African or pro-apartheid lobby here, which Britain and the United States obviously do have and did have. So we made a significant contribution. Yeah.
Sean, you were talking about the anti-apartheid movement in Ireland. Did you ever go out to South Africa?
I went out to South Africa in 1968. Kader raised it with me, and I went over to London, and I was talking to Joe Slovo and Ruth first, and I was given a suitcase with a banner in the lining, which had been put there by Ronnie Caswell's, was also in London, and we went to South Africa and we sent to Port Elizabeth. Hung the banner out of a high building, and lots of little leaflets rolled up inside the banner, scattered, and it said ANC fights on the banner. And there were quite a number of people were involved in such little adventures. One of them got caught, Sean Hulsey, and he was in 5 years in jail. And what effect it had, I don't really know. And I was asking, I put the question to Ronnie Caswell, and he was here, and to a few other people. This is what I'd really like to know is, did anybody remember, I'm sure there must be people who do remember, that little incident, picking up a leaflet or seeing the banner, and I never heard back. What effect that campaign had in South Africa, I don't really know.
And you weren't arrested yourself at the time?
No. Fortunately not. I was worried because I actually I had a rather crude little timing device which involved a little copper wire and a plastic tube and some nitric acid, but I'd actually spilled some on my finger, and I said this would be an unfortunate piece of evidence to have the acid burn on my finger. I thought, that's terrible evidence, you know. So I was, no, I didn't get caught. I was delayed coming back because there was a strike in the airline, the British airline, and I eventually got a flight back. So I was stuck a couple of days in Johannesburg, and they were worried about me in London. And eventually came back through the Portuguese airline and actually landed in Angola on the way back in Luanda. So I could say I'd been in Angola.
Going back to those years, the 60s and whatever. Any people that you can remember you could talk about, like from the Communist Party and things like Mick O'Riordan for one, Betty Sinclair another one from Belfast?
I could say I knew Mick O'Riordan all my life. That's, I have peculiar memories you have when I was on the bus with my father, and I had, as a very small child, and I had a stuffed toy, a pink elephant stuffed toy. My father, Frank, was very embarrassed having a child to carry this, and Mick O'Riordan was teasing him about it. He was the bus conductor, and I remember teasing Frank about the stuffed toy. So that's how far back. So I always knew Mick O'Riordan, and I always had this huge affection for him. That he was a kind of really lovely man in so many ways, you know, even though he was certainly, he could be grumpy or cantankerous or whatnot, but we forgive him all that. And he was so steadfast as well.
And he fought in Spain alongside your father,
Spanish War, yes. I've a picture somewhere of my parents meeting him on his return. And he looked so young compared to Frank was 10 years older, of course. And he looked so young beside them. So it was they did provide kind of leadership for the party and whatever. I mean, certainly open to criticism, but when there were people attacking him, and and they started to get personal. I mean, I was just furious, you know, because I loved him, you know. And same, and I also loved Betty Sinclair. Betty, she was more remote for me because I didn't see her that often. And only see her occasionally, and I didn't know her anything like as well. But I had a huge admiration for her.
Because wasn't she one of the founders of the civil rights movement in the North and stuff like that?
More than any other individual. And she had that understanding. And which the young people, People's Democracy, Bernard Dowd and Michael Farrell, didn't quite understand our position, you know, and their great impatience to get on with it, you know. But Betty, without Betty, there wasn't the same guidance for the Civil Rights Association.
And people like Betty,
she really had that political cop on, and she so built into the Labour movement. She was secretary of the Trades Council, but with that broader political understanding, that communist understanding.
with Bernadette and Michael Farrell and Aim McCann, all those people then, yes, they would have been impatient, but they were very young. They were all students then.
Of course,
Yeah.
they're lovely. You know, I
that's
don't say that as a condemnation
She would have been
by
more
any
mature
manner
than
of
that.
means, because they were very young and they were very brave, and I knew them. I mean, as a student, our group, we were up and down out of Belfast with Queen's students, and that a lot of them were in Queen's, and well, quite impressive, their energy and their intelligence as well.
The interesting thing I was going to say there about Betty Sinclair, like a lot of communists in Belfast, they were from Protestant working class people, which was really fantastic, wasn't it, considering the sectarian divide
It's not
of the
fantastic. Well, that's the word I would have used. It's just that they had that understanding. And the 30s, I mean, there was a group that joined in with the Republican Congress and were beaten out of Boltonstown on the orders of Sean McBride, by the way.
who was actually a member of the Anti Apartheid Movement.
Oh, he was.
Well.
I mean, Sean McBride in his old age was terrific, and he was United Nations made him was commissioner for Namibia, and he was. This was after he was gone from politics, and his deviousness wasn't put to the same as in various purposes.
And other people, as I know, who died recently, Tom Redmond. Obviously, you must have known him nearly all of your life.
Tom was lovely. Yeah. Tom was a very quiet man, and very learned, but very unostentatious. I mean, he didn't push himself, you know. But especially, I mean, in his later years, he would be somebody with a bit of wisdom and experience, and would talk sense, except he'd never speak ill of anybody.
But his articles in The Voice that he used to write were fantastic. Yeah. He was a beautiful writer.
Yes, very talented. And from his colony association, understanding of England very well.
Is it true that he designed the badge, the James Connolly badge that everybody wears? Is that right?
I don't know.
When he was in Britain.
It could be.
Because he was an artist as such as well, wasn't he?
It could be. We could check on that.
Just when you think of people like Mick O'Riordan and Betty Sinclair and Tom Redmond, all those older people, when the Soviet Union collapsed, like their stand, a lot of people who had been communists sort of changed. They remained consistently.
Like, disappeared, Morning Dew.
And was that because of someone like Mick O'Riordan?
No.
Did he give them a guidance and keep everybody together in the right direction?
It was just, we put a flag from our building. Somebody climbed up the dangerous stairs and walked over the collapsing floorboards to hang a red flag. And we said, our flag stays red. And that was correct. And I think we were also correct, perhaps probably not in detail, to stand with the Soviet Union. It's not that people would accuse us of seeing nothing wrong there, and well, we did know, but we didn't go on about it. But we probably excessively so in terms of being over defensive of any criticism at all. But the basic thing of support for the socialist system that was there was absolutely correct, and I certainly make no apology for. It was, I mean, all the students around them were kind of attracted to Trotskyism, you know, which was for them a way out of avoiding the necessity of taking sides. there's the Social Society in Trinity, they used to follow international socialism, neither Washington nor Moscow, but international socialism.
Was this your good friend
we
Rainer
choose a utopia.
Lycett O'Connor?
Yes.
You were a college
among them as well. And so preferring a chimera, a utopia to the, of course we don't prefer a utopia to what actually exists.
Well, in your day in Trinity there was Maoists as well, wasn't there? Active
There were
Maoists?
Maoists, and the Maoists I came across were were in the later days and they were more anti-Soviet than anything else. And anti-Soviet to the extent that anyone that the Soviets supported, like the South African liberation struggle, they opposed. This was in the, I would say, degenerated Maoism at that stage, and which seems to be, after the split between the Soviet Union and China was an appalling tragedy for mankind, and there was certainly nobody would come out of that blameless. But it caused a lot more trouble in countries like Philippines, Indonesia, in South America as well, where it's actually split working class from peasantry. And without that unity, you can't win, can you? Mm-hmm. So it was really a huge tragedy. I think we're probably, I'm not competent to get into to get a real understanding of it, but what I remember now, the Trinity Internationals trying to break up an anti-apartheid meeting when they came under the influence of one Hardiel Singh Baines, big Maoist who was actually, well, who people said was a CIA agent, and I think he probably was. And he certainly ended up quite rich. He may have started off with a fair bit of money, but we had to eject them from it. Some of us had to actually throw them out physically from an anti-apartheid meeting. It was an unfortunate necessity. But it showed how much it had degenerated, and backing, and in Zimbabwe, African National Congress was closely allied with ZAPU, with Joshua Nkomo, and the Chinese backed Mugabe, and they backed Renamo in Mozambique, they backed UNITA in Angola. Organisations, Renamo was actually set up by Smith's Rhodesia, and UNITA by the CIA, and the Chinese gave them their support, which was really quite criminal actually. But that was later stage. That's not anything to do with the original cause. But neither party really tackled continued the chauvinism that existed in both countries.
Just before you finish up there, Sean, I just wondering, can you before you finish up, can you remember the first demonstration or public meeting that you would have went to?
Oh, it would have been very small. So I remember the big ones, like the big, that when they had the South African rugby team. That was probably the biggest one that I was involved in organising, and that was huge.
Yeah.
demonstration, if we're often go around, manage to mobilise a few hundred people. It doesn't. Probably the biggest one I was asked was the one outside the British Embassy the night it was burnt.
After Bloody
That
Sunday.
was fairly big. That was very, well, it was very, that's one I certainly remember very well. And a small one where I was arrested, the police brought out their dogs out. And that would have been 62 over Cuba. And we'd come out, gang of us, mostly Trinity students, a few others. Noel Brown was there.
Oh, was that when Noel Brown got bitten by a dog?
Noel Brown got bitten by a dog, and most of my friends got bitten by the dog. A few policemen got bitten by the dog, but the dogs didn't bite me. And I was arrested. And so I was kicked for not beaten. So when I was in Pearse Street, nothing happened to us in Pearse Street, in the station. And I think it's down to the sergeant in charge. That's made sure that kind of thing didn't happen. But that was that I remember very well. That night, the night of the dogs. The dogs were new. They weren't trained. And how they got called in and rushed to the scene, maybe they volunteered, I do not know. But there was a much bigger demonstration about the dogs later on, because people were very annoyed at the police dogs being brought out, especially untrained police dogs. And untrained handlers as well. The handlers got bitten too. And it was how that happened. Well, Charlie Haughey was Minister for Justice, and he was, I would think, quite embarrassed about it. And anyway, it didn't happen again. So that was kind of funny. And the Housing Action Committee, I remember that. And I remember we sat down on O'Connell Bridge, and we were attacked by the police, and I was held by two guards and hit by another, hit in the face by another. But the following day, we went to see Kevin Boland, Minister for Local Government. Mick O'Riordan was there, I forget who else was there, but we went up to the office. I mean, it was the public office. And we said, we want to see the Minister. Well, he can't see you now. Well, okay, we'll wait. Proposing to stay there forever. As eventually we were hauled out, and I was hauled down the stairs. Up 4 flights of stairs. But I knew if I blew my nose I'd bleed. And it did, and the two guards who hadn't hit me at all got blamed for the bloody face that I arrived down with. And they got the blame. I was more opposed to the Garda Síochána as a whole at that stage rather than the individuals. They're probably due an apology now, but I doubt if they're still alive.
Might be retired anyway.
Or certainly well retired, they'd be in their 80s. So.
Well, thank you very much, Seán.
Solidarity with Latin America, Venezuela and Cuba in particular. I mean, the first arrest in Dublin was, of course, over in Cuba. My first arrest was in Holy Loch. When I was 18, where the United States nuclear submarines are based.
Is that where in Scotland?
In Scotland, yes.
Yeah.
In Scotland, yes.
You did a lot of travelling for your demonstrations.
Talking about big demonstrations, May Day in Caracas and May Day in Havana, they were big. They were the biggest demonstrations that was on. remember Fidel talking. What year was it? 2003.
Okay.
And one of his shorter speeches, about 2 hours, but he would make a bit of a political speech, and then he'd tell a little story, and then tell some jokes, and then come back and give you a bit of a lecture again. So, and none of this would be written down. And well, it was tremendously entertaining. I mean, I'm sure that the Cubans had heard it lots of times, but I'd never heard it before, and I found it very extraordinary. And 2005 May Day in Caracas was with Mary, and that's my wife. And she was the last holiday she was on. She was a year later. She died the following year. And Hugo Chavez speaking. Saying, how do we eliminate poverty? I said, you know the answer already, by giving power to the poor. This was a big cheer. So that was Chavez. But of course, you can't give power to the poor, they have to take it. And Mary started us off on Latin America. She went to Nicaragua in 1990 to pick coffee at a solidarity with the Sandinista. So she wouldn't have had the patience to put up with our party, but she was highly political in that, in terms of solidarity with the people's struggle.
And that were her family Republicans?
No, quite the other way. Well, her father anyway.
And also you go to Spain. You've been to Spain many times, well, to do with the Spanish Civil War, the Irish who fought in the Spanish Civil War.
Well, less because of that. In fact, when this commemoration started in '88, my mother was dying when Mary went, and she could get talking to anybody, conversation with anybody, and she got on very well with the Americans at the Lincoln Brigade, and so, and she represented our family on that occasion. But I guess I think, in going back over history, I mean, we have to do it the only reason we want to do it is to use it as an understanding of what to do and as a guide to our action, not as a retreat from politics or as an excuse. And so I don't want to get immersed in the struggles of the past, except insofar as we can use history looking forward.